Sean Christman, the VP of Operations at Cuts Clothing. Cuts is a over $50 million a year D2C brand in the apparel space, monster of a business. You guys have been really, really successful. And what you were saying to me ahead of time was that it's all been easy at every step of the way, never any problems, never any challenges. No, you have basically been a core part of the process of scaling up this business from launch on Kickstarter way back in 2016, all the way to over 50 million, still growing, probably going to be a 9-figure brand here pretty soon. 95% D2C, like really, really good business with a lot of different stuff that has happened along the way. And for me, probably the number one thing I've been thinking about in e-commerce recently is the way that needs of businesses change at different stages of business. And we're going to talk a lot about that, specifically in your role in scaling that business from an operational perspective. Is just a really, really hard thing to do. Before we get into all of that, Sean, tell people a little bit about Cuts a little bit more so that they can understand kind of who you guys are, what you do, what makes you distinct as they hear the rest of the story.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Andrew. This is going to be a lot of fun. Cuts started with a Kickstarter in 2016, really on the notion of being able to solve the problem of workwear attire. Identified the casualization of the workforce coming upon us, and really set out to solve that need. Now, over the course of the next couple of years, as we look to expand the business, plenty of opportunity in front of us being an apparel brand, and we did just that. Now, joking aside, it wasn't straightforward, hasn't been easy, but we've learned a heck of a lot from it. Grown that to the brand you were just referencing, a full-fledged lifestyle business across plenty of categories in men's, also included in women's, and recently launched into athletic apparel as well. So plenty of stories to talk about. That's the condensed short version of 8 years building this brand. We'll weave the rest of it into this conversation.
There are problems and there are distinctions at every step of the journey. When I hear essentially like really got work going on ads and things like that in 2017, we're now in 2025, you've crossed that barrier. One of the things I hear in that right away is that you guys have grown, if you just average that out, you didn't do that in 2 years or whatever, right? It's not that kind of story. And I actually think it's one of the things that's most compelling to me about your guys' story is that it fits what I think is a reasonable and probably smart timeline for growth relative to what some people expect in D2C, which is like build a big, it's 50 million is a lot of money. Build a big business, but don't try to do it mostly overnight for all kinds of reasons. Even when I think about some things I've been saying recently about how I believe that e-commerce right now is in the best place it's ever been. I think it's an incredible business to be in. And that a lot of the sort of doom and gloom comments about e-commerce, part of the reason I think there's some doom and gloom is that people have absurd expectations. I think part of the idea is that so you can't go from 5 million to 40 million overnight or whatever. That's not because the business model is bad. That's because your expectations need to change. So I want to actually break down a little bit about that journey first, and then kind of talk about how you guys have managed every step of it, because businesses in each of those stages along the way are really solving different problems. This has become very clear to me at a lot of levels, is that the problems you solve at 5 million and at 1 million are really different than at 50 million and 100 million and whatever else. So let's talk about that. Has that growth been kind of steady? Has it been? I'm sure you guys got a COVID boost, in your category. But can you sort of break down the key inflection points on that journey so we can understand what the needle movers were?
Yeah, in those early days, it's a gold rush, right? Facebook is an arbitrage, and growth happens quickly. A lot of those brands growing up during that time. A lot of those year-over-year growth numbers were massive in those early days. I think you mentioned COVID and getting that boost. During that point in time, we saw demand become incredibly finicky, and we took that into account as we progressed through the 2021, 2022, and up until today, and look to understand, rather than just diving head on into those with purchase orders getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and needing to take on capital to be able to do that and bringing risk onto our business. it was a matter of understanding how, as much as we're looking external to understand what other brands are doing, how do we respond to the market that we're in, was really working internally and understanding how we solidify our processes, our systems, to be able to understand how we make this sustainable. Because we didn't set out to be a 5-year business. We set out to be a household brand one day, and knew that we wanted to capture the moment, understand what that demand looked like, but ensure that we weren't getting out over our skis, like we saw some businesses do during that period of time. So still standing here today, probably because we didn't take all that opportunity that was presented to us, and we're able to navigate that post-COVID time where the consumer was on edge or less receptive to the way that we were marketing previously or in that period of time.
Yeah. So when you say not getting out over your skis, are you thinking specifically about essentially like seeing the moment and then placing a gigantic inventory, like forecasting that COVID moment out, placing a huge inventory order, and then ending up with way too much inventory on your hands? Because that is like, especially in apparel, like that's just that can kill you really fast.
Yeah. And it was, so it was exactly that. It was understanding that, the likelihood that it was going to go on forever. Partly it was, we hope this pandemic doesn't go on forever. And if that is the case, what do we do when demand slows? So it was part, looking at some big numbers, both from a purchase order standpoint, from a team capacity standpoint, and what that OpEx was potentially going to be, and understanding what the downside risk was, being able to compartmentalize that that risk could be real, and ensuring that we didn't find ourselves in a spot that we couldn't get out of.
Yeah. So let's. I mean, was that a margin consideration? I mean, have you guys targeted some like bottom line margin percentage that you want to maintain as you grow? Because there's this trade-off that is represented in moments like this, and both in the major moments of COVID and in the longer term steadier growth. Like you just said, you want to be a household name. You don't want to just have a big moment and go try and capture it, right? So it's like, do you guys target some kind of a bottom line margin as a percentage of your revenue that you try to grow? And I'm curious, however you think about that. If you don't, tell me how you guys do think about that, because there's this growth and efficiency trade-off that I think a lot of brands are dealing with, and it's a very hard existential question for brands. Like it comes down to kind of what you're trying to accomplish. So, and then maybe I'd like to talk a little bit about the notion of margin in a business and how you think about that as it scales, sort of both at the gross and net level. So maybe we'll start there though. That growth efficiency trade-off, how have you guys thought about that? Do you have a bottom line percentage target? How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, so we've been a bootstrap business from the beginning. So any capital that we brought on has been debt, and so we're looking to manage that. Especially in a post zero interest rate era. And I think there's a common misconception that growth has to come at the expense of profitability. And that's, you can take out the outliers, the, D2C 1.0 era that was growth at all costs and raise as much as you possibly can. And, ultimately IPO or sell that thing, and then that becomes someone else's problem. But really in the way that we thought about it, and I think the way that a lot of brands are thinking about it now, is back to what you were saying, that margin. Growth and profitability at any stage doesn't need to be a trade-off, or doesn't necessarily need to be a long-term trade-off. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive, even though sometimes it's thought that way. And if you have to resort to that fact, that you are going to lose money, it's probably a better time to look at your margin. And so to answer that question of what are we targeting, it's really relative to the opportunities that we have in front of us, whether it's a new product launch, whether it's, coming into a period of time where there's high consumer demand, like the fall buying season, and understanding how we are able to afford that, pay for that through our margin. So the way that we think about margin, more than just focusing on negotiating those common costs down. Now that's a big part of it, making sure you're bringing on a partner, you're bringing on a new vendor, you're developing products, that you're doing your due diligence and ensuring that you can bake in as much margin as possible. But it's also being disciplined about, and this is the way that we think about it, it's also being disciplined about decision making and having an understanding of your leverage. So what we look to do, and we were talking about this before we hopped on, is understand where our OPEX stands at any point in time and planning for those peaks and valleys. So our business, like many of direct to consumer business, are cyclical in nature, but there's peaks and valleys. And so planning your margin around a peak can have you really suffering in those valleys. And so it's understanding how we are able to add more variable costs into our business rather than fixed costs into our business. And as you scale as a brand, is making sure that you're understanding your leverage and how you can have downward pressure on those margins. One way that we think about it is, like I was saying, fixed costs versus variable costs, and reviewing those on a very routine basis, with the goal of, understanding our health, not only within a year, but how we're planning for the future. Being able to see when fixed costs are potentially scaling ahead of revenue, and being able to look around the corner and anticipate that could be the case.
One of the key ways to build margin in your business as you grow is to optimize your customer experience for profit. You can do that with my friends at Intelligems. Intelligems is the best CRO software that I know of, because not only is it incredibly robust, incredibly easy to set up, and with Intelligems, you can be testing everything from landing pages, PDPs, collection pages, home pages, full Shopify theme tests, price tests. You can literally split test your pricing, and most of you just pulled your pricing out of thin air, even though it's a huge decision that has a massive impact on your business and you've never tested it. You should go do that right now. Site-wide offers, free shipping thresholds, all of the things that represent places in your business where customers are interacting with you and your store, and you can test them to make them a better experience for your customer, more profitable for you. It's a win-win. And again, the setup is extremely easy. I am not a developer. I didn't need a bunch of developer help to get Intelligems going with my clients, and most of them are all using Intelligems to do all kinds of testing. We're seeing huge wins with site-wide offer testing, PDP tests, landing page tests, all set up easily through Intelligems. You should be testing stuff all the time on your site, and Intelligems is the best tool to use it. If you're serious about getting more profit as you grow your business, growing efficiently and profitably, you should be using Intelligems as part of your journey. Go to intelligems.io/Andrew-Ferris-podcast. The link's in the show notes. Don't worry, you don't have to remember that. And use the code FARRIS20, FARIS20, to get 20% off the first 3 months of working with Intelligems. It's a great product. I use it with all my clients. You should be using it too. That's a good thing that you're bringing up, which is essentially there is, you said, downward pressure on margin, and maybe saying that you don't actually have to sacrifice margin to grow. What are those downward pressures then? Essentially, what if I'm at 10 million trying to get to 50? Really, you could do any stage of this that you want. What are the things that I should watch out for that are actually going to potentially create downward pressure on my margin in a way that's going to hurt my ability to keep growing?
Yeah. So a big one for us, lessons that we've learned, over the course of these 8 years is trying to buy a solution. So, understanding, and let's use, we can use product as an example, right? Where, hyper seasonal product, trying to force an opportunity, onto our consumer, having a significant impact on gross margin and potentially contribution margin. Understanding that product margin opportunity versus it relative to your contribution margin during that period of time. So when we're bringing on a highly seasonal product in a moment in time where we want to capture that opportunity is not just doing the gross margin calculation and understanding that contribution margin should increase over that period of time. And instead, understanding how we are able to understand what a product can do for us. And through that, being able to leverage not only a new opportunity for us, but without taking on huge costs, bringing on big costs into our business.
Yeah. So if I can walk that back a little, then I think what you're saying is that like the temptation is like, okay, holidays coming, it's really seasonal. And so you're like, how do I go maximize this opportunity? You go put a bunch of resources towards something, and really it's just a cash grab. And that is the mistake that brands will make, which is they try to do that instead of essentially take the moment and maybe you do release a product, but for that moment and try to capitalize on the moment. But you have to be doing some kind of a calculation at the level of product consideration of like, is this actually high margin? Is this actually high opportunity? Is there TAM for this at this moment? Or am I just trying to grab something because I'm trying to chase a moment or something a little bit more, and maybe the way that actually looks in a business is that what you want to see happen in highly seasonal moments is that your contribution margin goes way the heck up. And the way it goes wrong is that you try to capture the moment, try to go make it bigger than it needs to be. And in the midst of that, what you actually do is just torpedo your contribution margin, even if you capture a bunch of revenue. Did I walk that back correctly?
Yeah, that's perfect. And another way to look at that is
I just did this with a brand of mine, Sean. We are walking through right now a challenge of I'm sorry to cut you off. It's such a temptation. I think what you're saying here is extremely important, which is that like you essentially get greedy, and it's because you have this expectation. I think you're really right about something it's not really a business problem. It's like a psychological problem. It's like there's just, especially you're growing, you're in a community, you're on X and you're seeing people do stuff, you're in e-commerce fuel or something like that, and you're seeing all these people talking about how great these moments are, and you're like, we got to go get this. And so you rally the troops and you go try it, and actually, like, if you just take the moment as it comes to you, now, granting, you have some obligation to create some volume relative to your forecasts, especially in a business like yours, where there's a cash consideration cycle issue. You can't be stuck with apparel. You can't be stuck with, if you get stuck with leftover inventory, it's hard to move past the moment. You're screwed, right? Like, so you have to actually do that at some point. But even that, like, what you have to do then is just be realistic about the timeline. Don't try and go too big. It's almost like what you're saying is just take the growth as it comes to you, take the profit as it comes to you, and don't cash grab. Don't resist the temptation as much as possible to like try to go triple your growth one year or whatever, triple, put that in brackets. Like that number could mean anything for anybody, I think that is hard-won wisdom. It's going to be very hard for anybody to receive that who hasn't done it. But once you've done it, I think it's a very good thing you're putting your finger on, because it is a major temptation.
Yeah. And it's there's shiny objects everywhere, right? And there's success stories all over the place. And being able to compartmentalize that, ingest that, and understand how that would work in your business, understanding the economics of other businesses are different, understanding other brands are capitalized different, there's no way to necessarily peek behind the curtain and understand how well it did for a different brand, right? And so, it's similar with discounting and being able to understand the contribution margin lift that you're going to see. And so, to answer maybe your original question more directly, we have contribution margin targets that we're working towards, and on a yearly basis, and being able to understand trade-offs in our entire margin stack, gross margin versus AMER, customer acquisition, and how we can leverage all of that to have the most favorable outcome, not for a short term, but for the long term.
On the other hand, the sort of counterpoint to that is that whereas the pursuit of scale can compress your margins by making those kinds of mistakes, the the reality of scale can also expand your margin because it builds advantages for that. From you are in the operational side of the business. I am curious to hear how that has changed for you guys over time. Like how has margin increased in the business as there's more scale? It's something that when I'm working with smaller brands, a lot of times it's something we sort of dream about in the future. It's like, what will happen with our conversations with our manufacturer once we are 3 times as big as we are now, whenever that day comes. So how has that changed for you guys?
Yeah. I think that comes down to a couple of things. One is having a long-term vision. Us as a product business, and a lot of my examples or, analogies today is going to revolve around that. But I think it's, similar across the board, but, having a product plan, and being able to leverage, that plan with our vendor base, building great relationships and having a long-term transparent vision, not only for, the brand, but the products that are included in that brand. What we've seen is being, upfront about those things and working with our partners, on our product, has a, shared goal, has a shared, excitement that, is not just within our walls, but is, with our partners as well. And so, yeah, there's a couple of key places where, you can, on the cash flow side, increase your conversion cycle, or decrease your conversion cycle. And then on the margin side, with economies of scale as well. So that first one is, being upfront about what our expectations are as we don't have a ton of vendors, but as we onboard new ones and work with our existing ones is having that, transparency around what increase in net terms would do for us, what it looks like from a production plan, from a business forecast, with 30-day terms, 60-day terms, 90-day terms, and how that risk can be shared between us and the partner. Same
How
on
do they
the
respond to that when you do that?
Yeah.
Like, do they? Yeah. Sorry, I just want to put my finger on that a little bit because I think this is something also that I think people think about with vendors. But like, if you go to them and say like, "Hey, we want you to float our business for twice as long," what do they say? I have a hypothesis, but I'm curious what you say.
Yeah, it's in theory, it sounds incredibly easy. Hey, yeah, give us some credit and we'll pay you back later, right? But really, what it takes is time. Takes paying the vendor back. It takes placing those bigger orders. Takes sticking not to the nice big round numbers, but seeing that progression, and being able to be transparent about the response from our consumer base and what it's doing for our business. So those early conversations, are goal setting, understanding, hey, this is a place that we want to get. Is that even in realm of possibility? You can do the product, you got the cost we're looking for, but it's there's 3 facets for us of a good relationship. But there are certainly partners that can't do that, aren't willing to do that, aren't at the size that they're able to be a part of that financing effort. So it's really takes some diligent onboarding, and we've certainly found ourselves in situations where we should be eligible for things that we got no answers for.
I think your comment about onboarding is a really good place to start, which is like setting expectations accordingly. I'll just say as a vendor myself, right? I'm an agency. It's really helpful when everybody's clear about that, and when we get out in front about it. And actually, when there's a sense from the brand side that like they want my agency to do well as well, that just makes me want to give better service. It makes me. I just did something with my clients where I like sort of took a step to say, I'm going to provide you a better service by increasing my resources against your business. Is going to create cost for me for sure. It may commit some significant cost for me, but I'm going to do it because I believe the clients that I have, and I'm pretty selective about my clients, like are actually going to deliver on the things they say. We've built some relationship. Like this is not my first day with any of them that I'm willing to make that step with them. It's precisely because there's been some trust built in that I'm able to go back. So anyway, I think that really works. And I think the thing that's particularly with a manufacturer that I think people don't sometimes think about is the notion is the notion that manufacturers, businesses work via scale. Like scale is the thing that makes that business work. That is what manufacturing is as a business. Like it is all about getting to scale. It's where their margin is. And so if you can actually offer that to them, and it's something Maytab Bogle has said on my show before, which is that like essentially a lot of manufacturers actually have access to better credit than you do. And so they're pretty willing to do that, especially if you show them that, like, hey, look, you have access to better credit than I do. We can work together here. If you guys use that and we use, and then you provide this to us, that creates better cash movement in our business. And that allows us to actually come back around and place larger orders with you. And, by putting more cash in our pockets, we're not going to just put it in our pockets. We're going to turn around and invest it back more into product and stuff like that. So it seems like, to your point, like people aren't going to do it right away. You have to build credit with them, just like you do with your credit card vendor or whatever, But once you do that people are pretty understanding of like, okay, yeah, let's do this together.
Yeah. And the changing cost is shared as well, right? If we have to change and go to a different vendor, there's upfront costs, there's time involved in all of that, and the same happens with the manufacturer, right? If you're a good business, a consistent business, one that can, to your point, keep their factory full, and allow them to do the headcount modeling and forecasting, and make that process easy for them, there will be advantages and leverage that you gain as the brand.
What specifically have you guys negotiated over time? Like if you can talk about that, like what are the ways that scale specifically in your business has created better margin for you guys?
Yeah. A couple of different places. One, I referenced net terms earlier. Being able to extend those terms comes with time, comes with consistency, comes with paying and paying on time. Builds that trust. Also, from a margin standpoint, being able to continue to hit forecasts with our volume products will drive costs down naturally as they're able to stage the raw materials, stage the trims, be able to buy things more in bulk is margin that we've been able to bake into those products. And then on the time side, if we're again, I think I've said consistency a number of times, but if you're consistent in your ordering, consistent in your paying those vendors back, there's even additional staging that they can do in terms of, raw fabrics that cut down lead times, cut lead times in half, and allow us as a business to make decisions later. Making decisions later allows us to be closer to the time that we're going to sell it. More information coming in, have a better marketing plan, be able to respond a heck of a lot more. And ultimately it results in less product sitting in product form, and tying up cash flow. So yeah, really across those three, net terms, product gross margin, and then time to market are all three things as over the course of time, again, open and honest up front with our vendors, our manufacturers, but things that we were able to work towards.
If you have not seriously efforted making your supply chain better in precisely the ways that Sean and I are talking about in this episode, you should do it with Move Supply Chain. You can go to movesupplychain.com. Move is a supply chain project-based agency type service built in the Philippines, a sister company of More Staffing, who you've probably heard me talk about on this show before. I've used Move to set up my supply chain for the brand that I am starting on the side right now. They have been an incredible partner to me. And I've also watched Move do a bunch of work for other people. Like I recently talked to somebody who saved 30% on their COGS and $1 off of every order on their fulfillment costs. Like just amazing work. And it's because they know where to start. They know how to effort these things in your business in a way that probably you don't. When I started working with them on my brand that I'm starting, Move sourced 60 manufacturers, reached out to 45 of them. Eventually we narrowed it down to one. The product cost is coming below what my target was, which is amazing. And the product quality is really awesome. Like they really just are great. And it's because they use years and years and years of knowledge of e-commerce supply chains to get you going on yours. They know exactly how to negotiate, how to think about finding the right vendor partner, partner for you. And if you talk to some folks there, like I have, one of the things that they have said to me is they love getting on calls with new clients who come in with them, because supply chains are so under optimized in e-commerce that they sort of start giggling to themselves on calls, because they know that very quickly they're going to be able to make a very large impact in these organizations. It's also at an affordable price because it is based in the Philippines, and because also they've just done a great job building a service that's high efficiency, and they can deliver it at a price that makes sense for you. If you want to negotiate your supply chain, build more efficiency in your business, have those kinds of outcomes, go to movesupplychain.com to get started today. They are really awesome. Tell them I sent you. You're going to love working with them. I just think there's some people who are going to listen to this who do not understand how important that three things is. Like, especially in an apparel business where there's seasonality, like just such. I mean, it's just so much easier to run your business if you have those things, and as you grow, it's a huge deal. Let's move to the way that that not just margin has changed in your business, but time has changed in your business, and the way that you think about this sort of timeline of your business. You know, now looking 8 years into it, or 9 years into it, or whatever that is. And sort of where your time goes now versus before. Like talk a little bit about sort of how you think about the timeline of the business and how that's impacting your decision making. Because again, we've sort of hit a couple of times this idea that you're trying to build something over the long term.
Yeah. And over the long term feels like a long time. The most direct way forward always feels incredibly long. And we touched on a little bit earlier, but through that long period of time, shiny objects pop up. People get bored, and you can quickly lose.
What do you mean
sense.
by that? People get bored. Like, I think this is a real thing. Can you? Do you have an example of that, like, or something?
Yeah. So we started out as just a t-shirt brand, a men's t-shirt brand, and have expanded, retracted our assortment over that period of time. And the especially as a bootstrap business, we answer to ourselves, and that's a fantastic thing. It's also we give ourselves a little bit too much liberty from time to time, and being able to go into anything, develop any product, and be able to put that forward is something that we've really became more disciplined about over the last couple of years. The creating a physical good, paying for that physical good, and then needing to sell that physical good is a full process. Time intensive, expensive process. And we've certainly had products that were off the product roadmap that we did because we wanted to try it. We did because we thought it was a good idea, that we did because we saw other brands seemingly having success doing those things. And so that element of ensuring that we're taking on the right amount of risk, that we're progressing the brand, that we're looking to increase our total addressable market, but also staying focused on what our mission is the result of not allowing ourselves to get bored.
Yeah. I think that's very helpful. There's a lot of conversation on e-commerce D2C X right now about product development and how that is the thing. And I think the way that the right push, there's in my view, there is a good push towards product-led growth. There is the way it goes wrong is that brands start getting antsy, and they start thinking they have to do something crazy to do it, as opposed to kind of what you said, which is like, you guys had a product roadmap. You could see a clearly laid out thing of what was going to push you guys forward. And then you're like, ooh, what about this brand over here doing this thing? We got to do that too. It's like, yeah. And I think it does, the stages of the business do feel different. They are, especially for people who've been there from the beginning, when everything's exciting and you're growing fast or whatever it is, and it is kind of more boring to run a more mid-sized business. Everything feels a little more buried in process or whatever, even if you're still passionate about it. So I think it's a very good insight that, like, one of the problems that brands have as they grow is that they just get bored.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And
you were, go ahead.
yeah. Cause within our walls, we're talking about a product today that we're not going to launch for 12 months. We're going to see those samples come in. We're going to go through the wear test. We're going to select colors for it this summer. We're going to get it into production. And by the time that launches, we're like, yeah, fantastic. Now what's next? Right.
Yeah.
But what we work to do is compartmentalize our consumer, compartmentalize the cohorts, understanding that, we're through the time we were talking here, we just acquired customers. They're trying cuts for the first time. And having that same excitement, providing that best journey that we can for those consumers over the first 30 days of their, being a cuts consumer, over the first 90 days, over the first 120. And looking through that lens allows us to have that understanding of, we've got to service that individual just as much as we're servicing that guy or that gal that's been around for 3 years, for 4 years. And having the ability to make that cognitive understanding of, yes, there are people that have a ton of crew curves, that did buy our new sweatshirt that we launched last fall. And so that new color is going to be another opportunity for them, as much as the person that just bought the crew curve today that hasn't tried the jogger yet. Even though those products have been around for a number of years, is being able to compartmentalize those two activities at the same time.
Yeah, makes sense. What about how do you think about the short term? You just kind of brought this up a little bit, but how do you think about that sort of like short term execution versus the longer term planning? Because you've got to get a product release right, and that product release has to be within the framework of something you mentioned earlier, which is like a product roadmap. Like how do you guys do the trade off in those things as you guys are growing?
Yeah, I think it's what we focus on a lot throughout our business, and we don't have a ton of bureaucracy, but there are some levels to our business, is really understanding relative impact and where we should be spending our time, and ensuring that we do spend times in those pockets. And so, with the goal of understanding where time is best served. So, one way that we think about this is, attaching a percentage to your focus. Let's say my impact in this business is 10%. So if I'm, and let's say, $10 million brand, just use nice big round numbers.
Yeah.
If I'm focused on tomorrow, how do I have an impact on tomorrow? We're talking thousands of dollars. If I'm focused on next month, we're talking now in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if I'm focused on next year, the story goes on, right? It's over $1 million. And so making sure that we're not too heads down focused. How do we optimize the account today, right? Okay, we're behind on returning customers. How do we get more tomorrow? Let's send double the emails, or let's launch that product earlier, things like that. Those are important. Those are tactical. Those are necessary for especially in our space. But also making sure that we pick our heads up and we look out further, because we understand that that's going to have the biggest relative impact, is especially as a leader in a business, being able to be out there as your team gets there to execute, and have a solid plan, have a solid strategy, so that those impacts can ultimately come home and be worth that 10% in those different time ranges.
Yeah. I really relate to this. I actually just sent a communication to my clients saying, I'm going to add daily tracking to my reporting, but I've actually resisted doing that for a long time, because I think, especially for smaller businesses, it can lead to a kind of short-termism that I think is actually not very good for businesses. Like, I sort of think businesses sometimes need to accept a forecast, either under or over performance, both in the short term, as long as it's not a death threat to your business, right? For the sake of actually trying to build longer term initiatives. Even something like sending a second email, I look at it and go like, you can send a second email that day, and that's fine. And I think that's good too. I think sometimes I'm a little too long-term focused and sometimes don't pull the trigger fast enough on things. But I also sort of respond to that by saying, like, what we should actually do is have a system set up for when we send a second email. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I would sort of like try to solve that almost before I send the second email. Again, as long as that second email is not going to be there. So maybe the daily forecasting and the daily revenue actually is the system, and that's fine. But and I am adding daily reporting to my clients because I've kind of come around on this. But I just think there is a real danger of short-termism, and I think it actually relates back to the initial thing, which is the sort of like people run their businesses extremely hot. They are barely profitable while growing very fast because they feel like they have to chase a moment. They're not long-term enough in their total viewpoint of their business, and therefore a miss for a day is like a much bigger threat than it should be to the business, you know? And so, yeah, it's just an interesting trade-off. I know you think a lot, I think, about systems in the business and how those scale. I'm sure the way you think about systems and what you guys have built today is very different than when we were at $2 million or whatever it is. Maybe we can dive into that a little bit. Like, what are the biggest differences in the ways that you guys operate today versus the way that you guys operated when you were a little bit smaller?
Yeah. So, yeah, when you're an early stage, it's speed, and it's survival. Those are the things that are prioritized, and nowhere will I ever say those are wrong, or those are the wrong things to focus on. It is, the where we've come around, where we've improved is in those, speed to market, survival mode type actions that we're taking, is just making sure that we document those things. We understand the impact of those things. And this doesn't mean full blown out SOPs and all of that, but it's trying to benchmark as much as possible, so that we can understand, when a manual process should be, automated, when something is going to be, a quick short-term solution and doesn't need a hire for it for long-term. And the way that we think about systems, processes, all of that is, it's much more than just people, SOPs, operating rhythms, meetings. It's an organization of those things, and that's really fostering that consistency over time. Because as you were going through that, just hearkening back to times where we're so focused on doing the thing that we're doing better that we don't understand we should be doing something else completely. Like we've fully optimized what we're doing, but it's no longer working. And so, we've established systems to be able to kick out those things, tell us where we're being less efficient, and but we're putting in twice the effort. We're better than we've ever been, but it's still not working. And so, when we think about systems or understand, when we're getting to a point in time where we might have some breakdowns coming, is, things like growth becoming unpredictable. We find ourselves firefighting way too much. We're living way too far in the business than working on the business. Overstocks, understocks, all those things, cash flow getting tight, things like that are signals to us that, hey, we got to tighten up. We've got to understand how we eliminate some of this manual effort, or how do we eliminate some of these processes that we have, and understand the tactics that we're doing, which ones aren't being as efficient or effective anymore. Like, we can send another email this afternoon, but sending a third and then doing the same thing tomorrow, there's diminishing returns on that. Yeah. And so usually those types of things are signals to us. Okay, let's zoom out and let's understand the inputs a little bit better.
Yeah. Are there any particular systems you guys have put into place that have been particularly valuable to you? Like whether it's around something like your inventory ordering or your marketing plans or your creative, just anything that you feel like, man, we have this thing dialed and the system is then producing the tactic outcome that we want, yeah.
Yeah. I think a big, early stage, it's easy to have an all team meeting, right? There's
Yeah.
two of you in a room. There's
Solve
three,
everything
there's
with a meeting.
four.
Yeah.
Everything is like, okay, just spin around in your desks or, let's hop on a call. And let's just, we could spend all day just getting on the same page. As we started to grow and, I'll use like, retention as an example, right? Marketing, there wasn't a director, a VP, a CMO, or what. It was just marketing. There was one person doing it. And as we brought on, somebody to focus on one aspect of the business, there's a natural communication gap that occurs. And you get to a certain point, maybe that's 8 people, 10 people, 15, where you're all still sitting there, but communication is just screeched to a halt because you get siloed in your business. And so what I would, for us and, at the scale that we're at and the learnings that we've taken in is what we really focus on is and where we have well-oiled machine, but one that continues to evolve every single month is our go-to-market strategy, making sure that all the way back to product development, we're having those conversations and, ensuring that growth loop that we live within, that there's no gaps in that. And so it's a maturing where, yes, we have functions that are primed throughout that full calendar. But we're having that go-to-market conversation, not the month before, not the quarter before. We're having that consistently, and that's just become part of our business where there aren't shocks, there aren't surprises. And, over that period of time, a product doesn't just show up and we're like, oh, that's right. We learned so much over the last 6 months. I wish we wouldn't have done that. We're able to instead adapt all those learnings, those weekly, monthly things, into that to make that go-to-market strategy much better. So, I think it's much more than just good communication. It's understanding how everybody has an impact, even if that's 9 months out in some of these cases.
A long time ago, I read a leader of an organization that had grown a ton. It wasn't a business, but it was a leader of an organization that had grown a ton, talking about the way his teams had changed over time. And anybody who's paid attention to my content for a long time has heard me use this analogy before, but it's been a long time since I used it. So it's probably time to bring it back. It's really helped me think about this problem that you mentioned, this sort of go from a meeting to something like your go-to-market strategy that, and your process for that you have just described. What he said was, every organization, as it changes and adds team members, it starts off as golfing buddies, where literally everybody actually stops and watches each other shot. Basically, when somebody does something cool, it's like you press go on something, and everybody can be like, "Hey, let's see what happened." Everybody pulls up the Shopify account, whatever, and it's super fun. It's everybody kind of does their own thing. You talk about it as you go. Everybody analyzes the shot, whatever. You go from there to a basketball team. And when you become a basketball team, there's 5 guys on the floor, but there's 12 guys on the roster. And there's still a ton of improvisation. There's still a lot of things happening in real time, but now you've begun to introduce somewhat of a playbook. And there's a little more specialization. So everybody still needs to be able to score. Everybody still needs to be able to play defense, but there's increasing levels of specialization within roles in the team. And there's increasing playbook sophistication, but it's still not nearly as sophisticated of a playbook as when you become a football team, which is the next stage. When you become a football team, the quarterback has to know the exact route each guy's running. Everybody on the offensive line has to be going the same way. And on top of that, the offensive lineman honestly may have like zero relationship with, like, I don't know, the one of your safeties or something like that, right? Like now you've got however many are on a roster. It was a 60 or something like that on a football team, 55. And then a bunch more on the practice squad or whatever. And now like the playbook is everything. And because you can't talk about it. You actually, and you have so little time. And so everybody, 11 guys on one side of the field have to know exactly where to go at the same time. And if one person blows their part of it, it can actually screw up the whole thing for everybody. But it has to be written down and it has to be decided on. And I think that's like a very helpful way to think about what happens to organizations over time is increasing specialization, increasing reliance on a playbook and on system, decreasing reliance on real-time communication. Yeah, it's part of why I have said I'm not trying to scale a large organization. It's like it's those parts of things are the playbook building and implementation is really hard for me. It's probably hard for everybody, but I don't really enjoy it that much. So for me, it's just kind of been stayed away from what I've wanted to do. And I've always thought like, if I was going to try and build something bigger, I would need somebody like you, sort of an operations person who's really going to take it on themselves to think about these exact kinds of things in the business as they change, So anyway, that analogy has always been helpful to me to think about how organizations change. Do you have anything else, Sean, that you think is like crucial in your guys' story that you just would want to make sure that if I asked a dumb question or the wrong questions that people would hear about what it is like to scale an organization over time from an operational perspective?
Yeah, I think, maybe I'll leave you with just a last thought exercise framework that we like to do to understand our operation, how we're leading, whether we have a plan, whether everybody's on the same page. And, we call it the bottleneck audit. And it's, understanding whether you are the bottleneck in the business. And we do this from time to time, just to make sure, that we've added a new distribution channel. We've added a new product, that we're keeping our systems and our processes and therefore our communication tight. And so what that thought exercise is pretty simple, but it's, if you were to leave tomorrow, what would your business be able to operate with you gone for 6 months? And if you came back after 6 months, would it look the same? Would it still be there? And being able to say, okay, yes, we need to shore up our processes on wholesale effort, or on corporate, or on, direct to consumer, or this new channel, I'm too over indexed in it, to where if I remove myself, it's something that can't service itself. So helps you understand, is it a people capacity issue? Is it a process issue? Is it a tool issue? And then you can get that on your horizon to be able to understand whether that's something that you need to solve now, in the midterm, in the long term. Obviously, you're not going to find yourself going away for 6 months unless you want to. But it simple thought exercise that just helps us understand, the fact that we understand where we're going, but we've got a team, we've got expenses going out. Are those paying themselves back, and are they on the same page?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really helpful thought. I like that idea a lot. Sean, it's been a great conversation. Thanks so much for taking the time to do it. I want to tell people where to follow up with you. Couple spots to follow up with Sean. What first is on X. I'm going to put the link in the description in the show notes. So if you're active there, do that. It's at Sean Christman, but without the I. So there's that. But also, I think maybe a great opportunity for some people who maybe want that bottleneck audit in their organization, or to be thinking about that, would be to book you on MentorPass, which you're available to do some coaching consulting via MentorPass. And again, I'll put the link there in the show notes so that people can do that. Definitely spend some time with Sean. The way this conversation started is that Sean and I started interacting on X, and I was like, whoa, this guy is really thoughtful and we've never met before. And suddenly there's like a few replies back and forth on some things. And this was not surprisingly a thoughtful episode in light of that. So it's been good to get to know you a little bit, Sean. And thanks again for your time, man.
Of course, Andrew, thanks for having me on. And anytime you want to chat.
Yeah. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you're doing that. I got more great conversations coming up all the time with very smart people in our space like Sean, with demonstrated success scaling organizations. You're going to like it. I've also a bunch of really good solo episodes coming up, including some stuff on how to manage ROAS campaigns, like just a bunch of stuff. So thanks again for doing that. Like I said, you should sign up for my newsletter, where I am sending out tactical input every single week without spamming you. It's just once a week. And then also some links out to some recent podcast episodes, things like that, so you don't miss the best content that I've got all the time. You could do that at ajfgrowth.com. Just put your email address either on the pop-up on the site or on the footer. That will get you access to that. And of course, you can email me at podcast@ajfgrowth.com. I'd love to hear from you on that. Don't forget to follow up with my sponsors, including Move Supply Chain, to get your supply chain negotiated. The links for that are in the show notes, as well as IntelliGems, who has been a great partner to me. So you can work with IntelliGems to get great CRO testing, build your business for margin. IntelliGems.io, and use the code FARIS20, FARIS 20, to get 20% off your first 3 months with IntelliGems. So thanks again for watching and for listening. I'll talk to you next time.